This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. On the show today, I have Nir Eyal. Nir's an author, educator, entrepreneur. He's all about connecting psychology, technology, and business. He has very effectively done this through a book called Hooked that I found fascinating. How technology is driving the habits, the new habits that we're all having to deal with every day. It's a worthy discussion. Whether you're into the direction that Nir goes or not, you're going to have to deal with it. And ultimately, the larger issues, questions that you have to consider, distraction, the morality of this. Very interesting. I hope you enjoy. We have finally connected.
Hey, I'm so sorry about that. I'm at a hotel and I'm having some technical difficulties that I didn't expect. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I actually have experienced hotel recording technical difficulties, so I do have some empathy there.
I should have accounted for this. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Where are you at today?
I'm in Vancouver.
Okay. Still West Coast, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Early for you, a little late for me. I'm in Saigon, so it's a little late.
Oh my goodness! What are you doing in Saigon?
Living.
Oh, is that where you live? I didn't realize that. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, I guess that's the best answer I can give. I could be anywhere. And I did this whole tour last year in Asia. And so I was in all these different countries and I had a lot of fun in Saigon. So I came back. That short answer.
Yeah. And so how long are you staying in Saigon, or are you kind of still hopping around?
No, I was hopping the first half of 13, and then I was here for the last half of 13, and I got back here in February. So for right now, I guess I'll stay here for a little while.
That's great. Good deal.
Yeah.
Hey,
fun
why
stuff.
not? I mean, if you have the flexibility to do it, that's a dream come true.
Yeah, seriously. What? Now, come on, you've got a little flexibility too. You could do it, right? You're writing, you're blogging, you could be anywhere.
Yeah, I've got this one thing that makes me a little bit inflexible called a kid. And that makes it a little bit more tricky. Although you're right. If I really wanted to, I could make it happen.
Yeah, I can be cavalier with no kids right now. So, okay. Hey, listen, give me a proper pronunciation of your name. I've got one of those funky last names, which is said Covel, but how do you properly say your first and last name?
Sure. So it's Nir Eyal.
Nir Eyal.
Yeah. So think of it as spelled Ayal. That would give you the proper pronunciation.
Probably a lot of people don't even ask you. They probably just butcher it, right?
That's right. Yeah. You know what's funny is the last name. I'm not surprised when people butcher. The first name always surprises me because my blog is near and far. Right. I made my blog that way on purpose. And one time a person introduced me as a speaker, and they said, "Our next speaker writes a blog called Near and Far. Please welcome Nir."
Listen, you're into some interesting topics, and they dovetail into my world. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I think it's interesting for everyone to consider. And you've come at this, your book called Hooked. You've come at this in an interesting perspective. You're talking about essentially how behavior can be engineered, how habits can be engineered, and how a lot of companies are approaching this and digging into the fields of behavioral economics, behavioral finance, and pulling a lot of that insight out and knowing how people operate and getting people to form habits. I think the interesting thing you do, which I didn't really expect, because I thought myself, as you were outlining issues, I was like, man, I don't know if I really like all this, that it's this. And then you essentially open up with the morality of it all. So why don't you give me an idea of how you became fascinated to get into this field of researching habits?
I don't understand why everybody isn't fascinated in this field. I literally wake up every morning and want to know more about how technology changes our behavior. I just think it's just fascinating. It's just a really interesting subject. I first was introduced to this field in my last company. So my last startup was at the intersection of gaming and advertising, and so we were putting ads inside social games. And I, from that vantage point, I just got to see so many companies and so many experiments come and go at the intersection of these two industries that are really about mind control. I mean, advertising and gaming is very much about manipulating user behavior. And so I had this vantage point just to see experiment after experiment, and sometimes things would work and sometimes they wouldn't. And I didn't see anyone kind of building a lexicon around what's working and why it's working. People just did what they did because it worked before, and so they continue to do it. And so I was looking for a resource for entrepreneurs because that's who I was and what I was looking for at the time. I was looking for the book that could tell me more around how user behavior is changed, so that it can be used for good. So it's not just used for something that has time waster or nefarious purposes, of course, but how can we use these techniques to help people live better lives? And so that's really what I set out to write in Hooked. And the truth is, I'll reveal to you and I'll reveal to your to your listeners that reading Hooked is a bit of a Trojan horse, that people pick up the book because it's titled How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And I think what they come when they buy the book is around how to build for engagement. And they'll certainly get that. They'll see the pattern that I describe in the Hook model of how to build for habits. But, part of my real goal with that book is that if you read the book, you really can't come away from it without thinking about the moral implications of habits. There's a whole chapter in there about how to decide what kind of products you should build, because I think the key question when it comes to habit forming technology is not, can we hook people? Can we create habits? I think then there's an obvious answer there. It's yes. The question now becomes, should we? And for what ends?
A real simple example. I met a lady last year and we were out to eat. And I looked over at some point in time, not that it was going bad that she was doing this, but she was just going to town on the iPhone. And I was like, what are you doing? I mean, here's a woman who was, dressed in heels, nice dress. And I said, let me see that. And she was playing this thing called Heyday, I think it was called. And basically she was farming some little digital video game. And I looked at her though, and I just realized, I was like, man, she's not even in control of this anymore.
Yeah, that is unfortunately.
There's an addiction there.
There can be. So I define addiction as something very specific and different from habits. Addictions are always bad. Addictions are these compulsions or dependencies on a behavior or substance, and they always hurt the user. So if it's a behavior that you're doing to a point where it's hurting you, then that's an addiction. That's bad news. What I'm trying to help people do is to create habits, and habits can be good and habits can be bad. And I think if we have a moral compass that helps entrepreneurs think of where should they allocate their human capital, right? We're not like VCs that we could kind of allocate a little bit of money on a lot of projects. We only can allocate our human capital on one startup at a time. So I want to give entrepreneurs a guidance system to figure out where should I best spend my time, because not only is the guidance that I provide a place where you're in a morally good place, but it also turns out that if you're a certain type of entrepreneur that looks at the world a certain way that I describe in the book, you actually increase your odds of success.
Let's do this. Let's jump into the moral part first, because I think we're both already there. We're talking about it, and we'll come back and then backfill with some of the techniques and the big picture issues that you put together, that if one is employing a certain morality, that there are a lot of good ideas in your work where people can take and execute better. But let's talk about the moral for a second, because if you think about the headlines in the last couple of years, I see these things, Candy Crush, and, for all intents and purposes, Facebook is nice, but it's a huge time waster. You've got Angry Birds in the news. So it seems like that a lot of guys and gals that have been very successful with firms, tech firms, are truly making fortunes off the time wasters. They're really in this pure manipulation area where people are stuck. And I was thinking about tonight before we talked, I was like, well, is there a typical person that gets caught up in these things? Is there a certain type? And there's a lot of different issues come up, but I don't know. I'm not even sure where to start on it all. But I mean, if you think about it from a big picture perspective, if you turn on CNBC and CNBC is talking about Candy Crush and Angry Birds, we've got a problem.
Well, I think to keep it in perspective, most of us develop antibodies, right? So society goes through these waves of a new technology comes out. We become infatuated with it because of all of its goods. We discover its bads, and then we scale back and we discover alternatives that take care of those bads. And for the vast majority of people, I think it's a little bit of an overreaction from critics to think that Facebook is so addictive and we're all mindless zombies that can't help ourselves. I use Facebook, I use Twitter, I use email. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I struggle with these things and I need to figure out how to put them in their place, but I don't think I'm addicted. If anything, I've got a habit that at times I need to make sure I control and I put in its place. That being said, for about 1% to 2% of the population that does have a psychographic profile for addiction, that's a problem. And there are certain people who go way too far with these technologies. The good news is that for the first time in history, if you make a potentially addictive product, we have a direct line to the addicts. So, it used to be if you made an addictive product, you could throw up your hand and say, well, yes, I make liquor, but I don't know who's getting drunk, right? I don't know who is an alcoholic. That's not my problem. Well, today, if you make an interactive technology, right? Facebook knows who's using their product for 40, 60 hours a week. They have that data. So for those 1% to 2%ers, there is a special responsibility that I think companies that produce these kind of technologies have a moral responsibility. But to keep it in perspective, it's a very small percentage of the population that goes too far. For the rest of us, what I think is, the 98% of us, we need to figure out how to put it in its place. And so for, my personal example, I wrote an article for TechCrunch called The Strange Sex Habits of Silicon Valley, which was all about how everybody in Silicon Valley that I know of has this struggle with overusing technology, right? Our iPhones are with us 24/7. And, many times I catch myself on a Saturday when I should be playing with my kid, I find myself checking email. And there's no good reason for that. So I wrote this article about how in the evenings I was finding myself checking more and more email and, surfing the web 10, 11, and 12 o'clock at night when I really should have been in bed spending quality time with my wife. And so I wrote this article around how the solution for me, once I recognized this problem, was to break the hook. And I describe the hook in detail in the book. But basically, I think one of the important things I want people to know about the hook model and how habit-forming technologies hook us is how they in their lives can recognize these hooks and do something to put a wedge in between the 4 steps. So what I did, I went to Home Depot and I bought myself a $5 timer. And this $5 outlet timer is something I connected my router to. So every night at 10 p.m., my router shuts off. So I've put a wedge between the trigger and the action phase of the hook. So this is an example of how I think many of us have to put technology in its place. I don't know about you as a writer. I can't write without this program Freedom. So every time I sit down for a session of writing, there's this nice little program that a nice little app that I click on. I say I want to write for 120 minutes, and it blocks out the internet. I can't use the internet unless I reboot my whole computer. And so that gives me the space and the focus to do what I need to do. And I think we're all going to have to be challenged with these new techniques because, frankly, our technology is so good. And so we have to figure out ways to put barriers around it so we can get work done and live the kind of lives we want.
Blocking distraction, that's it's mission critical. And I was thinking, you were just mentioning as an author, my last book, I didn't do it like you did, and I know of Freedom. I actually just watched Californication on loop. So I figured if I could just watch David Duchovny for 4 or 5 seasons on loop, a similar type process. It kept me occupied. It kept me from doing other things. But you're right; it's spot on. And I think it's People might be listening. They might say, hey, this is common sense, but it doesn't make a difference if it's common sense. It's still got a stranglehold. And we are, as you say, okay, maybe it's for the high addiction personalities, it's 1% to 2%. But for the rest of us, we probably are doing things where we're giving it too much time or we're wasting too much time, and we need that block. And why don't you go ahead and outline, you've got these 4 areas essentially that the hook goes through: a trigger, action, variable reward, and investment. Why don't you kind of walk somebody through a quick analogy or anecdote or story on how those apply?
Sure. So the pattern that we see repeated time and time again in habit forming technologies is what I call the hook model. And it's a pattern designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And so we see time and time again these 4 steps of a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. The trigger comes in 2 forms. There's an internal trigger and an external trigger. And these triggers are things that cue the next action. And so we can trigger the next action by an association with an internal trigger. An internal trigger is something in the user's day-to-day lives, a routine, an emotion, a situation, a place that doesn't have any explicit information for what to do next. But every time they experience that emotion or routine or internal trigger, they are cued to take the next action. So an example would be, what do people use when we feel lonely, when we're seeking connection? Well, that would be Facebook. When we're uncertain about something, before we scan our brains to see if we know the information, we Google it. And when we're bored, what do? Well, there's a million different solutions to alleviate boredom. We check the news, we check stock prices, sports scores, Pinterest. There's lots of different technologies we use to alleviate that sensation of boredom. So internal triggers tend to be these negative emotions, what psychologists call negative valence states. And they cue our next action because the brain learns to associate solutions to its problems with these products, with these technologies that take us out of these negative states that we don't like feeling. So that's the internal trigger. The external trigger is something in our environment that explicitly tells us what to do next. So an external trigger might be a button that says click here or buy now or play here, play this kind of a video button. All these things tell us what to do next. Then comes the action. The action phase of the hook is the simplest behavior in anticipation of reward. So these are very, very small actions that these products get us to take in anticipation of reward. So pushing the play button on YouTube would be an example. Scrolling on Pinterest or on Twitter. These very, very simple actions in anticipation of reward. Then comes the variable reward. The variable reward is some kind of something that gives the user what they came for, scratches the user's itch, and yet leaves them wanting more. So we see all sorts of variable rewards in our...
What would be an example, though, as you go from trigger action and then you come to variable reward? And let's say the scrolling in Twitter or something, going through a feed. What is that variable reward as you're scrolling through? The clicking on, seeing something? What is that variable reward at that moment in time with that example?
Yeah, so with Twitter, for example, it's an information reward. I classify these 3 types of variable rewards as rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. And so clicking in your newsfeed has, let me back up, lots of these addictive products or habit-forming products, they have one or more of these variable reward types. So in your newsfeed on Twitter or Facebook, there's rewards of the hunt. You're hunting for information. Right? So you see one thing that's not interesting, the next thing is not interesting, but the third thing is very interesting. And to get more, you just keep scrolling and scrolling. It's around rewards of the hunt, around information. There's also the social component, rewards of the tribe. You're following people that you know, that you want to see what they're doing, and there's some variability around what their updates and postings might be. So that would be rewards of the tribe. Rewards of the self, there doesn't as much apply in the Twitter context. Like I said, it's very difficult to have a product that has all 3 of those variable reward types, but you see time and time again one or more of those variable reward types. And then the final step, just to finish the hook, is the investment phase. The investment is a bit of work that the user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass. And this happens in one of 2 ways. Either loading the next trigger. So doing something that brings the user back in the future. So when I send an email, for example, or when I use WhatsApp and I send someone a message, there's no immediate gratification, right? There's no points, there's no badges, nothing happens. But I'm loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a response back. And that it becomes the external trigger to take me through the hook in the future. The second thing that investments do is store value. So in that Twitter example I was talking about, the more followers I accrue, the more value I store in the product. So habit forming technologies should appreciate with value. They should get better with use. Unlike, things made of atoms in the physical world that depreciate over time, things that are habit forming should appreciate. They should get better over time. And so the more followers I accrue, the more valuable Twitter becomes to me. So if Twitter sent out an email tomorrow, let's say, and said, hey, Michael, we're shutting down unless you send us a check, I'm guessing that the person who has 10,000 followers is going to be much more likely to send in that check and keep Twitter going for them than someone who has just 10 followers. Because it's an example of stored value, that the more I invest, the more valuable the product becomes to me. So that's in a very quick nutshell. There's a lot more in the book, of course, explaining these first steps.
I think what's interesting, too, is that this is a process. When we think about all the tech names that we all know, the apps that we use, the new apps that will show up tomorrow that we'll start to use, did you find in your research that behind the scenes, this breakdown, whether they use your terminology or not, is this breakdown, the trigger, action, reward, investment, is this typical conversation in the development of most new products, most new tech products today? Behind the scenes?
The language isn't there yet. The techniques are being used and have been used for a very, very long time. But I think that's starting to change. I think that the process of forming a company and creating a successful startup has gone through this evolution of becoming more of a science and less of an art. I think when it comes specifically to the consumer tech space, it was kind of, we'll see, we'll throw some spaghetti at the wall and we'll see what sticks. And I think you see with the rise of lean startup and customer development, it's becoming a more scientifically rigorous process. And I think what I'm trying to add to the conversation is, look, the most expensive part of lean startup, as espoused by Eric Ries and Stephen Blank, this 3-step process of build, measuring, and learning, which I'm a big supporter of, the most expensive part is the building. Right? That's where the blood, sweat, and tears and money all go. So if I can help entrepreneurs build the right thing sooner by looking at not only what they're able to tell us, but the deeper psychological principles that guide their behavior, then we can spend less time and effort building the wrong stuff and devote more resources to building the right thing sooner. Because, as one of my business school professors used to say, that cash is oxygen and oxygen is life. And if you don't find your product, if you don't find the thing that users want in time before your cash runs out, you're dead. And so what I'm trying to do is to help people build the right thing sooner by looking at these principles of user psychology.
You had some fun examples in the book. One thing that really struck me was under your investment section, where you brought up IKEA and how, and I'll let you run with the story, but essentially IKEA has learned that something happens, something magical happens for their business by you doing the work. Now I don't personally like that. I frankly, if I'm going to buy some furniture, I want it brought to the house, I want it set up. I really don't want to do the work. But that's, IKEA has made a fortune by doing something entirely different.
Yeah. So what I mentioned in the book is around how investments change our brain in a way that when we invest in something, when we put work into a product, be it offline or online, we begin to see it differently. Cognitively, our preferences begin to change. And so the example I give comes out of research done by Michael Norton and Dan Ariely at Harvard, where they've done research that shows that when people put effort into something, they irrationally value that thing. And so Ariely calls this the IKEA effect, because he mentions how when he builds some IKEA furniture, he builds a table and then he stands back and he just look at that table. Look what I did. Look what I made with my own 2 hands. And it turns out that people will irrationally value those things that they put effort into, and become less likely to discard them. And you see these examples, offline and online.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's such a cool little story though, but that's such a massively successful firm built around, not only built around that, but that's a very prominent aspect of their success. And it's a fairly straightforward idea that anybody can understand.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell me, mentors and influences, why are you in this space? Who in Silicon Valley have you sat down with that has said, Nir, this is really where you need to be thinking? Or, hey, have you seen this? Who struck you? Give it up. No secrets.
I am still waiting for someone to do that. I haven't had a meeting where somebody has said, Nir, let me be your guiding light. I'll be your mentor. I'd love some mentors. I have to admit that.
Okay, let's get rid of the word mentor because I'm not really sure I've ever had one either. But who did you sit down with that inspired you as a young man? You're in your 30s now. So who was inspiring you at 25, 26, 27, 28? Who struck you? Who did you first meet or sit down with where you're like, okay, now light bulbs are going off?
Well, I've I always take inspiration from my family first and foremost. My father was an entrepreneur and recently sold his company after 30 years. And so I had that example, and I started 2 companies myself before becoming an author. And to be honest, what I'm doing today as an author is not what I expected to do. I started writing because I had a conviction that my next startup would be something around habits, that I believe that habits become more important as the interface gets smaller, right? From desktop to laptop to mobile to now wearable. I just believe that habits would be very, very important in product design. And so I started writing and researching about this field almost 3 years ago. And that really was what became in this book. Was I started writing, and what inspired me was my readers, frankly. I mean, I get today so many emails and so much feedback that keeps me going. I've kind of entered this hook of my own through the writing process that I'm hooked to writing. When I do these workshops, I see the effect on fellow entrepreneurs, and I feel their pain. I was in their shoes, and I know how difficult of a struggle starting a successful company can be. And so when I see these entrepreneurs that come up to me or write an email and tell me how they're using my work or how they think it should be improved, that's really where I take my inspiration. All this feedback that this technology now facilitates.
No, I relate to that. A common or a similar experience, the feedback for the last 15 years, all online, where you all of a sudden, truly it's the reach out and touch someone. And that loop, and not from an ego standpoint, it's just fun. It's fun to kind of take the feedback in, then process it, then give it back out and keep expanding the conversation.
That's right. And it is a hook. If you think about it, there is a trigger, action, reward, investment to being an author, to being a blogger. And it's intoxicating. And I would classify it as a healthy habit. I mean, I've been able to, because of this loop, if you think about the old way of doing things where an author would, and it's not that old, but where an author would, sit in their room and write a book proposal and then sell it to a publishing house, and then they'd go off for a year and write in isolation. That's not what I do. I publish my ideas on my blog so that I can get constant feedback in these little increments from my readers and change my examples, change my writing, sometimes dramatically based on user feedback. And so there's no way I would have published this book. I don't think I would have had the confidence, nor would I have had the sustained drive without the social feedback from my community. It was very important to me.
Hey, one last thing that I saw you, I think it was either on a blog post or a comment, and you were talking about the WhatsApp deal and how much money was paid out for this app. And I'm sure some people out there, maybe they're jealous, or frankly they're hating, or they just like, why not me? And I've got a really simple way of looking at those types of things. First, life is not fair. That's number one. And number two, I think you have to look at some of these things in the tech space as a lottery. there's going to be, when you can connect the entire world, and if you give the entire world something that's useful immediately, you're going to make a lot of money. So I would argue that the WhatsApp deal, instead of anybody ever saying, oh, gee, why not me? I would say, hold on, but what an inspiration. I can reach the world too. I can go invent something. I can write something. And if I really put my blood, sweat, and tears into it, I can reach people too. So I just don't ever look at that as a negative. I'm sure some people do, but there's another way to spin it,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And but by the way, if you want to go a little bit longer, I know we got started late.
Sure.
It's in this. I wrote this article called "How to Deal with Your Insane Jealousy of the WhatsApp Deal," because I to be perfectly honest, when I heard about $19 billion for this simple messaging product, that the technology is not special. Anybody could have made that technology, but very few made it at the right time and place.
And I use Viber. Viber is much better as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I remember when Twitter had its IPO, I just happened to have the TV on, and I was listening to the commentators talk about how, we don't know if Twitter's going to have sustained value because look, any kid can build it. It's a very simple program. And that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, because, of course, the value of these technologies is not the code. That's not what makes these companies valuable. It's the network effect they've built, right? Yep. They've created habits in people that make it very difficult to stop using these products, and they become important facets of people's lives. So WhatsApp is a great example of that. 74% of people who install that app use it every day. Yeah. That's all you need to know. And that there's hundreds of millions of them. That justifies the value of the company right there. And so, to me, I think that's a very telling story about the power of habit forming technologies, that it's not just the code itself. It's not even hard technology per se. It's a behavior challenge. How do you get people to change their behaviors in a way that keeps them around, that keeps them engaged for a long period of time? And then on that second question of how do you deal with your jealousy, I detail this fantastic study. There's this great YouTube video of this study conducted at Emory, where this researcher gives pieces of cucumbers to two monkeys. And at first, both monkeys are perfectly happy taking the cucumber and doing some task. They're supposed to give a rock to the researcher. And so these two monkeys in two separate cages are very happy taking the cucumber, giving the rock. They're both hunky-dory. And then the mean researcher does something different. She gives one of the monkeys a grape in exchange for the work, and the other monkey the slimy old cucumber in exchange for the work. And so this monkey that was just a minute ago fine with getting a cucumber, when the other monkey got the cucumber, all of a sudden goes into this tremendous rage, and he starts throwing things and baring his teeth and screeching and just creating this horrible protest. And it turns out that this idea of equal pay for equal work is something that may be endemic in our DNA to all primates, not just these rhesus monkeys. That when we see somebody getting something else or getting something better for equal work, it creates this jealousy in us, and I think we're all susceptible to that. But hopefully, when we realize that that's just something that's in our DNA, that's something that's natural and innate in us, we can deal with it in a more productive fashion and understand that, look, everybody in Silicon Valley is smart. Everybody in the technology field that makes these kind of innovations is smart. Smart is the price of admission, right? Success is a combination of smart plus fortune, right? For being in the right place at the right time. I don't like to call it lucky because you have to be fortunate. You have to do the right things at the right place at the right time. But just because you succeeded doesn't mean you're the smartest person in the world, and just because you failed does not mean you're a dummy. There's a lot of factors that are exogenous, that are outside your control, that oftentimes lead to one company being more successful than another, or one person being more successful than another.
So for most of my career, I rail against anybody that makes predictions in financial markets. It's just an impossibility. So since you have probably a much better handle on Silicon Valley and Palo Alto and those areas than I do, I want to hear your predictions. What are we going to see in the next year or two What is bubbling behind the scenes? Is it just going to be another video game? Is it going to be another social media app that everyone has to? Or are we starting to kind of settle down to where the grand innovations and the apps are not really there, and it's more waiting for another piece of hardware to strike our fancy?
So the evolutions. So let me put it this way: the revolutions come from interface changes. So where we see these massive changes in a technology, and where we see an explosion of new innovations, come from when the interface changes in some way. So when we went from these huge mainframes to personal computers, and then from personal computers to now laptops, and then from laptops to mobile. These are interface changes. These are big shifts in the way we interact with technology because they fundamentally change our behavior. We're able to take these things in places we couldn't take them before. And so that creates all kinds of new hook opportunities, frankly, right? New triggers are enabled, and therefore new behaviors are facilitated. So there will be a lot of evolution when it comes to the mobile phone. I think there's a long way to still run in terms of this fundamental tool that our mobile phone is for is communication. Now, the phone is, I almost never talk on my phone, but man, do I do a lot of communicating with it. And so I think there's still a long way to run for companies to help people communicate. That's an area that I think is still, there's still a lot more that we can do to help people communicate better and to connect them with folks. Then I think the next revolution comes when we have a new interface that I think is going to be something wearable. Now, I don't know if it's Google Glass, right? Google Glass may work, it may not work. I don't know if it's ever going to gain mainstream adoption, but we know something in the next probably 5 to 10 years is going to be on our bodies. I don't know if it's biometrics. I don't know if it's a smartwatch. I don't know if it's some kind of heads-up display, but something we take with us on our bodies that doesn't feel like a separate piece of technology, that doesn't feel like a separate entity. That's going to be, I think, one of the next revolutions when it comes to personal technology, because that's really what I look for is where does the interface have a break? And so that's where we have to basically reinvent everything, right? All the companies that were successful on the web, when it came to mobile, all of these things had to be reinvented, and very few of them actually made the migration. The ones that were successful now on mobile are the ones who kind of made for mobile first and tailored that experience just for the portable experience.
Interesting insights, Nir. I'm envious of the world. It's probably a fun corner of the universe to be in right now. So I appreciate you coming on today. Hey, where is the best? The book is Hooked. They can find it everywhere now, right?
That's right. Well, actually, not everywhere. Only on Amazon at the moment.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much everywhere. Bezos has made it everywhere right now. So, if we're two authors having a conversation and we say go buy a book, and somebody can't figure out that they're gonna, that it's at Amazon, they're probably not really useful as a reader. Even let's just be blunt about it, right? I mean, if they're that far gone right now and they're still looking for a border somewhere in the neighborhood. Okay. Anyways, tangent over. Hey, where's the best place to find you online? At Nir and Far? What's the exact URL?
That's right. So it's NIR. My first name is spelled NIR. So it's nirandfar.com. And the book is Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And and I'm available on Twitter as well. Nir Eyal at Nir Eyal is my Twitter handle. Yeah,
we kind of went. I mean, I didn't take people through a linear fashion of your book. We touched on a lot of different topics, but it's definitely an eye-opener. That it's not a common conversation or a common discussion that you're seeing in mainstream media, but it's clearly affecting how all of our lives go. So it's worth checking out.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
We'll talk soon. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold,
trust the government and trust Wall Street. This is absolutely not for you.